Entity Manager Factory in Jakarta persistence. Now we are focusing on Entity Manager Factory. The Jakarta.persistence.EntityManagerFactory class is a factory for entity managers. The Entity Manager Factory interface is used by the application to obtain an application manage entity manager. When the application has finished using the Entity Manager Factory and or at application shutdown, the application should close the Entity Manager Factory. Once an Entity Manager Factory has been closed, all its entity managers are considered to be in the closed state. As an example, we can consider interface Entity Manager Factory. Interface used to interact with the Entity Manager Factory for the persistence unit. When the application has finished using the Entity Manager Factory and or at application shutdown, the application should close the Entity Manager Factory. Once an Entity Manager Factory has been closed, all its entity managers are considered to be in the closed state. This is in the module Jakarta.persistence and in the package Jakarta.persistence. As an example 2, we can consider this code segment. The following example illustrate the creation of Entity Manager Factory in Java SE environment and its use in creating and using resource local entity manager. Here the persistent class is a bootstrap class that is used to obtain an entity manager factory in Java SE environment. It may also be used to cause schema generation to occur. Here you can see the create entity manager factory method with this method creates and return an entity manager factory for the named persistent unit. Here the parameter persistent unit name, the name of the persistence unit. Here you can see the entity manager factory interface used to interact with the entity manager factory for the persistent unit here. Here you can see create entity manager method. Create a new application manage entity manager. This method returns a new entity manager instance each time it is invoked. The isOpen method will return true on the returned instance. Here you can see the close method. Close the factory, releasing any resources that it holds. After a factory instance has been closed, all methods invoke on it will throw the illegal state exception except for isOpen, which will return false. Once an entity manager factory has been closed, all its entity managers are considered to be in the closed state. Now we are considering a entity manager factory interface as an example, Entity Manager Factory interface in Entity Managers and persistent context. The Entity Manager Factory interface is used by the application to obtain an application manage Entity Manager. The interface Entity Manager Factory in package Jakarta.persistence in module Jakarta.persistence interface used to interact with the Entity Manager Factory for the persistent unit. The Entity Manager Factory interface is used by the application to create an application manage Entity Manager. Each Entity Manager Factory provides Entity Managers instances that are all configured in the same manager. For example, configured to connect to same database, use the same initial settings as defined by the implementation, etc. More than one Entity Manager Factory instances may be available simultaneously in the JVM. Methods of the Entity Manager Factory interface are thread safe. Now we are considering obtaining an Entity Manager Factory. For example, here within Jakarta EE environment, an Entity Manager Factory can be injected using persistent unit annotation or obtained through JNDI lookup. The unit name element may optionally be specified to designate the persistent unit whose Entity Manager Factory is used. For example, here you can see the obtaining an Entity Manager Factory in Java SC environment, for example. Outside a Jakarta e-content environment, the Jakarta.persistent.persistence class is the bootstrap class that provides access to an Entity Manager Factory. The application creates an Entity Manager Factory by calling the create Entity Manager Factory method of the Jakarta.persistent.persistence class. For example, here now we are considering references to Entity Manager and Entity Manager Factory in metadata annotations. Here we consider persistent context annotation. Properties that are not recognized by a vendor must be ignored. Here the persistent context annotation is used to express a dependency in a container manage Entity Manager. And its associated persistent context. The name element refers to the name by which the Entity Manager is to be accessed in the environment referring to the context, and is not needed when the dependency injection is used. The optional unit name element refers to the name of the persistent unit. If the unit name element is specified, the persistent unit is for the Entity Manager that is accessible in JNDI must have the same name. Type element specified whether a transaction is scoped or extended persistent context is to be used. If the type element is not specified, a transaction is scoped, persistent context is used. Synchronization type element specify whether the persistent context is always automatically synchronized with the current transaction, or whether the persistent context must be explicitly joined to the current transaction by means of the Entity Manager join transaction method. Optional properties element may be used to specify properties for the container or persistent provider. Properties defined by this specification must be observed by the provided vendor. Specific properties may be included in the set of properties and are passed to the persistent provider by the container when the entity manager is created. Properties that are not recognized by the vendor must be ignored. Persistent context annotation declares one or more persistent context annotations. It is used to express dependency on multiple persistent contexts. As an example, we can consider illegal state exception. If the entity manager factory has been closed, in method entity manager create entity manager in interface entity manager factory. As an error example, we can consider this error occurred in the environment with Spring Data 2.6.1 with Eclipse link and Jakarta 3. Java.land.no class def found error. Java X persistence entity manager factory at org.spring framework.data.jpa.util bean definition utils etc.